Under the dim glow of the streetlights, I stood frozen. The sound of her voice still echoed in my mind, cutting through everything like a knife. "I'm with someone special tonight," she had texted. Her usual girls' night out excuse was never this cryptic. It hit me like a freight train, an overwhelming mix of confusion and cold rage bubbling beneath the surface. The car she was in, too sleek, too new, wasn't one she owned. A flash of red, her unmistakable figure in the passenger seat, and a man I didn't recognize at the wheel. I couldn't let it go. The moment I saw it, something deep inside me snapped. Without a second thought, I hired a private investigator, a lawyer, and everything else I would need to show her that I wasn't the clueless fool she thought I was. No, I wasn't just sitting back and waiting for answers. I was taking control. The pieces started to fall into place. Evidence, messages, lies, and with every piece my blood boiled hotter. And then, the night arrived. Instead of hiding behind a screen or waiting for an apology, I decided to confront her in the most public way possible. She wouldn't just slip away this time, pretending it was all a misunderstanding. I showed up at the very spot where she thought she'd be safe, her romantic evening in full swing. She saw me first, her face paling as the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. The panic was clear. She wasn't expecting me to be there. I wasn't expecting her to look so guilty. What she didn't know was that I had a plan, an ironclad one. In my hand was not a bouquet, not a fist of confrontation, but divorce papers. Papers that would strip away everything she'd been using to cover her lies. The words, "You are homeless now," were clearly printed, and in that moment, I watched the confidence that had once seemed unshakable dissolve into pure panic. "You're crazy. What the hell is this?" she shouted, her voice wavering, but I could hear the underlying fear she tried so hard to mask. I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I simply waited, watching as the cold fury built in her eyes, her mind desperately trying to come up with an excuse. "You think you can just show up and ruin everything for me?" she spat, her face twisted with venom. It wasn't the apology I expected. It wasn't the remorse I had secretly hoped for. This was something else, something darker. A woman who didn't care anymore, a woman who would lie her way out of anything to keep her pride intact. But this time, there was no escape. There would be no clever words to manipulate me into submission. Not tonight. Now, she had a choice. Face the consequences or keep pretending that everything was fine. But nothing was fine anymore. Her eyes darted around, desperate for a way out. It wasn't just her nerves. It was the realization that everything she had carefully built in the shadows was about to unravel in front of her. For a moment, I could almost see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to come up with some excuse that would make this all disappear. But it was too late. She had pushed me too far. She had crossed a line that I would never let her return from. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Allison," I said, my voice calm. I could feel the tension radiating from her. This wasn't just some fight anymore. This was the end of a story, the culmination of months of lies and deceit. I had been blind to it before, too trusting, too in love to see the cracks forming. But now, everything was clear. "Harder? You think this is hard?" She sneered, the anger in her voice making her words sharp. "You have no idea what I've been dealing with." I scoffed. "What you been dealing with? You've been out there, living a double life, lying to my face, and now you want to play the victim? You're nothing but a coward, Allison." Her face flushed with rage, but there was no denying it. Her control was slipping. She had always been good at manipulation, at twisting situations to make herself the center of attention, but now that I had the upper hand, she couldn't handle it. The woman who had always controlled every conversation, who had pulled the strings behind the scenes, was now unraveling before me. "I don't need to listen to this," she said, her voice shaky as she turned to leave. But I wasn't about to let her walk away. Not this time. I stepped forward, blocking her path. "Oh no, you're not going anywhere. Not until I get the truth. I want to hear you admit it right now. Who is he, Allison?" Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, I saw a flash of fear. She was trapped. She could no longer keep up the act. She had always thought she could fool me, play me like a puppet, but now the strings were in my hands. "What do you want me to say?" she snapped, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. But it was too late. Her facade had already crumbled. I want you to admit that you've been cheating on me, that you've been lying to me for months. I want you to say it, Allison, I demanded. My heart was pounding in my chest, not out of fear, but from the rush of anger and betrayal that surged through my veins. Every moment of this, every hurtful word, every painful realization had been building up for so long. Now that I was finally standing here, face to face with her, I needed her to acknowledge what she had done. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. She looked at me, almost as if she couldn't believe I was forcing her into this corner. Then, finally, she let out a bitter laugh. You really think I'm going to apologize for what I've done? For living my life the way I want? You don't get to control me anymore. You're pathetic. Her words stung more than I cared to admit. But I didn't flinch. I wasn't going to let her win. Not after everything she had done. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice low and steady. You're living your life. But it's over now. It's time to face the consequences. She looked at me in disbelief. Consequences? You really think you can just take everything away from me? You think a few papers are going to change anything? You're nothing without me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. No, Alison. I realized something tonight. I am enough. I don't need someone like you. Someone who lies and betrays, dragging me down. You're the one who's nothing. Her face twisted in fury as she tried to push past me again. But this time I wasn't moving. She was trapped. Get out of my way, she spat, her eyes filled with venom. No, I said firmly. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore. You're not in control here. I am. I watched as her shoulders sagged in defeat, and for a brief moment, I felt a small glimmer of satisfaction. She was no longer the woman who held all the power in our relationship. The tables had turned, and I wasn't going to let her take it back. I don't even know why I married you, she muttered under her breath. But it wasn't a statement of remorse. It was just another jab. She was lashing out, trying to maintain some shred of dignity, but it was clear that she knew the game was up. I married you because I believed in us, I replied, my voice quieter now. But now, I'm done. I'm done pretending everything's okay. I'm done being your fool. Her eyes narrowed as she processed my words, but she didn't respond. She knew. Deep down, she knew this was the end. For a moment, there was a silence between us. The air hung heavy with tension. She wasn't going to apologize. She wasn't going to change. And that was the hardest pill to swallow. But in that silence, I found my resolve. I've made my decision, I said, my voice steady. We're done, Allison. Don't try to contact me again. Her face turned red with rage, but I didn't care. There was nothing left to say. I had finally found my strength, my voice. And it felt good. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of what I would do next. But for now, I was taking my life back. The drive home was surreal. The city lights blurred as my mind raced through the events of the night. What had just happened? Was it really over? A sense of disbelief settled in, making my chest tight. I never thought I'd be standing there, confronting her like that. I never thought I'd have the strength to finally say the words I'd kept bottled up for so long. But it was done now. There was no turning back. When I got home, I didn't even bother to turn on the lights. The house, once full of laughter and warmth, now felt cold and empty. I walked through the front door and let the silence wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking for her, waiting for her to come home, to smile at me like everything was fine. No, tonight had shattered all of that. Tonight had forced me to look at the truth, the painful, ugly truth. I sank into the couch, my hands gripping the divorce papers that were still clenched in my fist. I could almost hear her voice in my head, the way she always sounded when she tried to make me doubt myself. You're nothing without me, she had said. The words stung, but not in the way they had before. They no longer had any power over me. In that moment, I realized just how much I had let her define me, how much I had allowed her to manipulate my emotions and decisions. The phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. For a moment, I hesitated. Who could this be? I had no intention of answering calls from anyone related to her at this point. But curiosity won out. I unlocked the phone and opened the message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. The message read, "She's not who you think she is. I don't want to get involved, but you need to know the truth. She's been seeing someone else. I'm not the only one." I froze, reading the words again and again. My heart started to race. Was this another person involved in her betrayal? Another man? A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. How deep did her lies go? How much of her life had been a web of deceit? The text had come from someone who claimed to be aware of the situation. But who were they? And why reach out now, after everything had already come to light? The message continued. "I know it's hard to believe, but trust me when I say, you deserve to know. She's not just cheating on you. She's been playing you for a fool for a long time. I'll be in touch again soon." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The truth was out, even if I hadn't heard it from her. But that wasn't enough. I needed answers. I needed to know exactly how far her lies had stretched. I needed closure, something that she had stolen from me long ago. I leaned back in the couch, closing my eyes. The world felt like it was closing in. Every memory, every sweet word, every laugh we had shared suddenly felt tainted. The house that we had built together, the plans we had made, the future I had once believed in, all of it was a lie. She had known what she was doing. She had known exactly how to play the role of the devoted wife, while secretly betraying me behind my back. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the manipulation, the constant lies, the gaslighting, the way she made me feel like I was the one losing control, the one losing my mind. But now, it was all coming into focus. And the more I thought about it, the more disgusted I became. I wanted answers. I wanted to hear it from her. I wanted her to say it, to admit it all. But deep down, I knew she would never give me that satisfaction. She would never show me that level of honesty. She was too far gone in her own lies. The phone buzzed again, and my heart skipped a beat. Another message from the same unknown number. I opened it immediately. "You don't have to believe me, but I know what I saw. She's been with him for months. Don't let her play you again." I felt my stomach churn. I didn't know what to think anymore. Who was this person, and why were they reaching out to me? Was this someone trying to clear their own conscience, or was it someone who genuinely wanted to help me? I couldn't tell, but one thing was clear. The truth was more twisted than I could ever imagine. I stood up and paced around the living room, trying to make sense of it all. She had been cheating on me for months, and yet I had been completely unaware. I had trusted her, loved her, and in return, she had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I couldn't even begin to comprehend the depth of her lies. And that's when it hit me. What if there were more secrets I didn't know about? What if there were more lies I hadn't uncovered yet? The feeling of betrayal was overwhelming, and it was like a weight that pressed down on my chest. I had always believed in us, in our relationship. But now, I didn't know what to believe anymore. I knew I had to face her. I couldn't just sit here and stew in my anger. But what was I supposed to say? How could I confront her again, knowing everything I knew? I took a deep breath and grabbed my coat. I wasn't going to wait anymore. It was time for the truth to come out. It was time for me to finally get the answers I deserved. I walked out the door, determined to put an end to the chaos once and for all. The next confrontation would be different. It wasn't about emotions anymore. It wasn't about trying to fix what was broken. It was about closure, about moving on from a woman who had already moved on long ago. I didn't know what to expect when I walked up to her door, but I knew one thing for sure. This was going to be the final showdown. No more second-guessing, no more wondering. Tonight, I was going to confront her with everything I knew, and I wasn't leaving until I got the answers I deserved. I had spent too long being manipulated, too long pretending that things were okay when they clearly weren't. The car was still parked outside, the familiar one that I had seen in the driveway so many times. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it felt like a reminder of everything I had lost. I had tried to push away the feeling of betrayal, to ignore the truth as long as I could. But every time I saw that car, it was like a punch in the gut. I rang the doorbell and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. A few seconds passed, and I heard footsteps approaching from the other side of the door. I steeled myself, ready for whatever was coming next. When the door opened, there she stood. Allison, my wife, the woman who had broken me, the woman who had betrayed me time and time again. She looked at me, her eyes widening with a mix of surprise and annoyance. She hadn't expected me to show up again. But this time, there was no game. There was no act. There was no pretending. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice laced with irritation. "I told you we were done." I looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel that familiar pull in my chest to protect her, to give her the benefit of the doubt. No, tonight was different. "We're not done," I said, my voice steady. "We're far from done." Her eyes narrowed, and I saw the faintest flicker of panic. She was trying to hold her ground, but I could tell she wasn't as confident as she used to be. The games she had played so effortlessly in the past were losing their power. "You need to leave," she said, taking a step back, but I wasn't backing down. I stepped forward, blocking the doorway. "No, Alison, I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth." "The whole truth," I said. My voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made her pause. This wasn't the same man who had begged her to be honest with him before. This wasn't the same man who had stood by her, supporting her despite everything. This man was done. She hesitated, looking away for a moment. I could see her mind working, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. But she was out of options. She had no more excuses. "What do you want me to say?" she snapped, finally meeting my gaze. "That I made a mistake? That I'm sorry? I'm not going to do that. So just leave already." The anger in her voice was unmistakable. She wasn't sorry. Not one bit. She was angry that I had figured her out, angry that I had taken control of the situation. And yet, I wasn't backing down. "I want you to tell me about him. Who is he? How long has this been going on?" Her face went pale at the mention of another man, but she quickly masked it with a defiant sneer. "You wouldn't understand," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You never understood me. Not really. Maybe if you had paid more attention, if you had been there for me, instead of always being so selfish, things would be different. But you don't get to judge me now. You don't get to tell me what to do." I stepped closer to her, my chest tightening with the weight of her words. How many times had she used that excuse? How many times had she played the victim, turning everything around so that I was the one at fault? "So it's my fault now?" I asked, my voice rising. "You think it's my fault you cheated on me? That's rich, Allison. You were the one who lied to me. You were the one who broke my trust. And now, you're blaming me for it." She recoiled slightly, as if my words had physically hurt her. But I wasn't done yet. "You're a coward. You've been playing me this whole time, and now you want to turn it around on me? I'm done with your lies." She opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. For a moment, I saw the cracks in her facade, the vulnerability she had always hidden behind her anger and arrogance. But it was too little, too late. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered, her voice small, almost pleading. You just what?" I interrupted. "You just wanted to have your fun and pretend everything was fine? You wanted to keep me around while you had your little fling on the side?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't going to fall for it. "Don't even try that. Don't try to pull the I'm sorry card now. You're not sorry, Allison. You're only sorry because I found out. You were never sorry for what you did to me." The silence that followed was deafening. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of everything hanging between us. She finally broke the silence with a laugh, but it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was a laugh of bitterness, of someone who knew they had lost but couldn't bear to admit it. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you?" she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "You think you're so much smarter, so much stronger. But you're just as weak as the rest of them. You think I need you? You think I care?" I could feel my blood boil at her words, but I didn't let it show. "No, you don't need me. You never did," I said, the finality of my words hitting both of us. "But you're not getting away with this. I'm done. You're out. And this time, there's no coming back." She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't wait for her to finish. I turned and walked out, feeling the weight of my decision settling in. I didn't need to hear anything more from her. I didn't need her lies. I didn't need her manipulations. I was finally free. And as I walked away, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. This was just the beginning of what was to come. The next few days were a blur of emotions. The feeling of rage and betrayal hadn't faded, but neither had the overwhelming sense of relief that came with finally taking control of my life. The weight of Allison's deceit still pressed on my chest, But now I had a sense of clarity that I hadn't experienced in a long time. For years, I had let her run the show, manipulating me, controlling the narrative, and making me doubt myself every time I questioned her actions. But now I was the one in charge. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers once more. The ink on them seemed darker, more final now that I had actually handed them to her. That moment, the look in her eyes as she realized that her grip on me had finally slipped, had been the turning point. I hadn't just confronted her, I had broken her illusion. She had never expected me to do what I did. She thought she could keep lying, keep cheating, without facing the consequences. But I wasn't like the men she had used before. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me anymore. The phone buzzed on the table, dragging me from my thoughts. I glanced down, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw who it was. It was Allison. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether I should pick up or let it go to voicemail. But curiosity got the better of me. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally come to her senses and realized the magnitude of what she had done. Maybe this time, she would apologize. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. She wasn't capable of that kind of honesty. Not anymore. I swiped to answer the call and brought the phone to my ear. "What do you want?" My voice was cold, detached. There was no room for pleasantries, no room for small talk. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice surprisingly calm, almost soft. "I know things got heated the other night, but I just want to explain myself." I wanted to hang up right then. There was nothing left to discuss. She had already explained herself through her actions, through the lies and the betrayal. But I couldn't stop myself. Maybe I was still holding on to a tiny shred of hope that she could somehow make things right. Maybe I still wanted to hear her say the words I had been waiting for all along. "Explain yourself? You've had plenty of chances to do that, Allison. You've had years to explain your actions," I replied, the bitterness creeping into my voice. "And now you think I'm going to sit here and listen to your excuses? After everything you've done?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she might hang up. But then she spoke again, her tone more pleading. "I know I hurt you. I know I messed up, but I want to fix this. I want us to work through this. Please, just let me explain." I could hear the desperation in her voice, and for a brief moment, it almost made me second-guess my decision. Maybe she was telling the truth this time. Maybe there was a chance for reconciliation. But then I remembered everything. The way she had disrespected me, the way she had lied and used me, the way she had treated me like a fool for so long. "No," I said firmly, my resolve solidifying. "It's over, Allison. There's nothing you can say that will change that. You've made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. I'm done being your backup plan, your safety net. You're not going to string me along anymore." I could hear her start to cry on the other end of the line, but I wasn't moved by her tears. I had seen her cry before, and it had always been a manipulation tactic, a way for her to pull me back into her world of lies and deceit. But not this time. This time, I wasn't going to fall for it. "Please, just think about this," she pleaded. "We've been through so much together. I don't want to lose you. You're everything to me." Her words hit me, but they didn't have the same power they once did. I didn't want to lose her either, but I had already lost her a long time ago. The woman I had married was gone, replaced by someone I didn't even recognize. The woman standing in front of me that night wasn't the one I had fallen in love with. She was someone else, someone who had torn apart the trust we had built, someone who had chosen another man over me. And now, she expected me to just forgive her? "No, you don't get it," I said, my voice shaking with the anger I was trying to suppress. "You don't get to make promises anymore. You don't get to lie your way out of this. I'm not your fool, Allison. I'm not going to keep playing your game." She stayed silent for a moment, and I could hear her trying to hold back her tears. But I wasn't swayed. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. "I'm done," I said, my voice final. "I'm moving on. You should too. Goodbye, Allison." I hung up before she could respond, my hand trembling as I set the phone down on the table. The relief I felt wasn't immediate. It took a few moments to truly sink in. But when it did, I realized just how free I was. Free from her lies, free from her manipulation, free from the toxic relationship we had built. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions, but they were different this time. There was no more wondering if I had made the right choice. There was no more second-guessing myself. The decision was made, and I was finally at peace. I had learned the hard way that people don't change. Not unless they want to. And Allison didn't want to change. She wanted to keep using me, keep lying to me, and I wasn't going to be her victim anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of her betrayal was still heavy, but it was no longer crushing me. I had taken my life back, and I wasn't looking back. The days that followed my conversation with Allison were a mix of quiet reflection and relief. As much as the initial shock of her betrayal had rocked me to my core, it was also the moment I started to rebuild. The emotional exhaustion that came from dealing with her lies for so long was overwhelming, but there was a sense of clarity now that I had made the decision to let her go. The idea of moving forward felt foreign at first, but as time passed, the fog began to lift. But that didn't mean the pain was gone. It wasn't that simple. I could feel the weight of it in my chest, like a lingering ache that wouldn't quite go away. Every so often, I'd find myself thinking about the moments we shared, the good times, the laughs, the plans we made, and it would all come crashing down again. Was it all a lie? Or had there been some real love in there at some point? The questions haunted me, and as much as I tried to shut them out, they wouldn't go away. But then something else started to happen. The anger, the burning resentment that had been simmering beneath the surface began to fade. I started to realize something important. I didn't need her validation anymore. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need her to tell me that she was sorry. What I needed was to take control of my own life, to stop looking to her for the answers. I needed to heal on my own terms. I took a long walk one evening just to clear my head. The weather was cool, and the streets were quiet. As I walked, I thought about all the things I'd lost. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was everything that had come with it. The life I had built around someone I thought I could trust was now shattered. The dreams, the future, the plans for the future, it was all gone. I had to start from scratch, and that scared me. But there was something else that scared me even more, the idea of staying stuck, of wallowing in self-pity, letting the betrayal define me for the rest of my life. I knew people who had done that, who had spent years carrying around the weight of their past mistakes, letting them dictate every decision they made. I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to live in the shadow of my past. As I walked, I realized how much I had been letting Allison control my thoughts. Every time I thought I was moving forward, her voice would creep in my mind, telling me I wasn't good enough, telling me I'd been too trusting, too naive. But those thoughts weren't mine. They were hers. She had planted them in my head, and it was time to take them out. It wasn't an easy process. Every day felt like a battle between moving on and holding on to the past. There were moments when I would catch myself wondering what she was doing, who she was with, and that feeling of jealousy would burn again. But each time, I reminded myself that I wasn't the one who had betrayed trust. I wasn't the one who had thrown everything away for the thrill of something new. The next time I saw Allison, it wasn't a confrontation, it wasn't dramatic. It was a brief, quiet encounter that almost felt surreal. She was standing outside the cafe where we used to go together, and for a moment, I just stood there, watching her. She hadn't seen me yet, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't overwhelmed with emotions. I wasn't angry, sad, or confused. I simply watched her, almost like a stranger. She looked the same as she always had, same sharp features, same confident posture. But there was something different about her now, something that I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the way she held herself, like she was carrying a secret she wasn't sure she could hide. Or maybe it was the fact that, for the first time, I realized I no longer cared about her life, about what she was doing. She was no longer a part of my story. When she finally saw me, there was a brief flicker of surprise in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with a cold smile. "Well, look who it is," she said, her voice clipped. "I wasn't expecting to see you around here." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I just gave her a nod, as if to acknowledge that I had seen her, and that was it. It wasn't an apology, and it wasn't a confrontation. It was just a quiet acknowledgement of what had passed between us. "I guess you're doing okay," she said, the words coming out of her mouth like she was trying to convince herself more than me. I just shrugged. I'm getting by, I replied. For a moment, neither of us said anything else. It was like the years we had spent together didn't matter anymore. They were just gone. And in that silence, I realized something. I had let go of her. The relationship we had was over, and it wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about the fact that I had outgrown it. Outgrown her. She fidgeted with her phone for a moment, and when she looked back at me, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Regret? Maybe. Or maybe it was just the realization that I wasn't the same person I used to be. I wasn't the same man who would have begged for answers, who would have tried to fix everything. No, I was done with that version of myself. I guess you're moving on, she said, almost as a statement, not a question. I gave her a half smile. Yeah, I am. She looked away, and for a moment, I could almost see her struggling with something inside. But then she straightened up, as if she had made some kind of decision. Well, good for you, she said, her voice cold. I'm happy for you. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. I turned and walked away, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. This wasn't some grand, dramatic ending. It wasn't the confrontation I had envisioned when I first found out about her betrayal. But in its own quiet way, it was the perfect ending. It was a sign that I had truly moved on. It took a while to fully let go of the emotional scars she had left on me. But I had done it. And now, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. It was almost a week later when I found myself at a crossroads, standing on the edge of what felt like a new chapter in my life. The emotional weight of everything that had happened still lingered in my chest, but the more time passed, the more I started to understand the gravity of what I had done and what I was about to do. I had finally broken free from Allison's web of lies, but now the real challenge began. How would I live without her? How would I move forward, knowing that I had been betrayed by someone I thought I could trust? The first few days after seeing her outside the cafe had been strange. I kept replaying the encounter over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation I had imagined in the past, but in some ways, it felt more real. It was a quiet acknowledgement that we were both moving on, no longer bound by the past. But as I stood there, walking down the street on that cool evening, I realized that there was still a part of me that was waiting for something, some kind of closure, some kind of moment that would make it all feel right. But there was no such moment. The truth was, there was never going to be one. I had been searching for validation, for some kind of apology that would make everything better. But I had learned the hard way that it didn't work that way. The closure I needed had to come from within myself. As I sat on the edge of the park bench, watching the people pass by, I realized just how far I had come in the past few months. I had gone from being the man who allowed himself to be manipulated to the man who had finally taken control. I had walked away from a marriage built on lies, and while the pain of that decision still stung, it was nothing compared to the pain I had been carrying all those years. I had made the right choice. But now, it was time to face the reality of moving forward. It wasn't going to be easy. I still had moments where I felt like I was stuck in the past. It wasn't just about Allison. It was about the person I had been. I had allowed her to define me, to control my decisions, and now that I was free from her, I had to figure out who I was without her. Who was I when I wasn't the person I had been for so long? The idea of being single again felt strange, almost foreign. I hadn't been single for years. I hadn't known what it meant to live for myself, without the constant influence of someone else. And as I sat there, watching couples walking hand in hand, families enjoying their evening together, I realized just how much I had taken for granted, how much I had been willing to sacrifice for someone who didn't deserve my loyalty. I was still angry, still hurt, still confused by everything that had happened. But in that moment, I realized that the only way to truly move on was to let go of all of it, to stop clinging to the past, to stop looking for validation from the woman who had betrayed me. She had made her choice. Now, it was time for me to make mine. I stood up from the bench and walked toward the nearby coffee shop, the cool evening air brushing against my face. The streets were quiet, and as I walked, I found myself lost in thought. It wasn't a bad thing being alone. It wasn't the end of the world. In fact, it was liberating. I didn't need someone else to define my worth. I didn't need someone else to make me feel complete. As I walked through the door of the coffee shop, I noticed the familiar faces behind the counter. The barista smiled at me as I ordered my usual, and for the first time in a long time, I realized just how much I had been missing out on by allowing myself to be consumed by the past. The past didn't define me. It wasn't who I was anymore. When I got my coffee, I took a seat by the window and watched as people went about their lives. I watched as they interacted, laughed, and lived without a care in the world. It was in these moments that I realized something important. Life goes on. It doesn't stop just because you've been hurt. It doesn't pause because someone else has made a mistake. The world keeps spinning, whether you're ready for it or not. I didn't need to rush into anything. I didn't need to fill the emptiness that I had been feeling with distractions. I needed to focus on myself, on becoming the person I wanted to be. There was so much I had neglected over the years, so many parts of myself that I had ignored because I'd been too focused on someone else. But now, I had the chance to change all of that. It wasn't about dating or relationships or even trying to find the perfect person. It was about finding peace within myself. It was about healing from the wounds that had been inflicted on me and learning how to trust myself again. For the first time, I was starting to understand what true freedom felt like. As I sat there, sipping my coffee, I thought about the future. What did I want from it? Where was I headed? The answers weren't clear, and maybe they never would be. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. There would be bumps along the way. There would be moments where I doubted myself, where I questioned whether I had made the right choice. But I was starting to realize that those moments didn't define me either. They were just part of the journey. I didn't know where the journey would take me, but I knew one thing for sure. I was finally ready to live it. The weeks passed, and the days blurred into one another as I started to settle into my new routine. I had no illusions that the path ahead would be easy, but the hardest part was behind me. I had taken the most difficult step, walking away, and now I was free. The anger I had carried for so long was fading, like a storm finally clearing after days of torrential rain. There were still days when the bitterness would creep up on me, threatening to overtake me. But I had learned how to recognize it, to acknowledge it without letting it consume me. Each day was an opportunity to reclaim my peace, to take back what had been taken from me. I started spending more time with friends, people who hadn't been part of my life when I was with Allison. It felt like I was rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried for years. I went out for drinks, caught up on old hobbies, and even joined a few groups at the local gym. I wasn't doing these things to fill the void left by my marriage. I was doing them because I wanted to, because I needed to remind myself that life was bigger than the one chapter that had just ended. One evening, I met up with an old friend, Nick, for dinner. He had always been the type of guy who could make light of any situation, and his carefree attitude was exactly what I needed. The moment I walked into the restaurant, he greeted me with his usual grin. "Hey man, long time no see. You look different," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. He gestured for me to sit down. I raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "More relaxed, I guess. I don't know, just a vibe. You seem like you're finally letting go of all the stuff you were carrying around." I hadn't realized it until he pointed it out, but he was right. There was a calmness in me now that hadn't been there before. It was as if I had been running on adrenaline for years, and now I could finally breathe without the weight of constant tension. "I guess you could say that," I said, taking a seat across from him. "Things have been good, I guess. I've been focusing on myself, trying to figure out what I want out of life." "That's good, man," Nick said, nodding. "I'm really happy for you. You deserve to find some peace after everything you've been through." I smiled, appreciating his support. But there was something else I had been grappling with, the idea of moving forward with someone new. In the past, I had avoided dating, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't bring myself to open up to anyone again. I wasn't ready to invite someone into my life, not when my heart still carried the scars from my marriage. But that didn't mean I wasn't starting to think about it. The thought of dating again felt intimidating, even though I knew deep down that I didn't have to rush. I wasn't ready for a serious relationship, not yet. But the idea of meeting new people, of exploring new connections, was starting to feel less daunting. For the first time, I was allowing myself the possibility of something different, something real. Have you thought about getting back into the dating scene? Nick asked casually as he took a sip of his beer. I paused for a moment. The question had caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought about it seriously until now. Sure, I'd gone on a few dates here and there, but nothing ever felt right. My heart still felt too heavy. I don't know, man, I said, rubbing my chin thoughtfully. I'm not sure I'm ready to jump back into anything just yet, but I don't want to keep avoiding it forever. I guess we'll see what happens. Nick nodded. Fair enough. There's no rush. Just don't let the past keep you from moving forward. His words hit home. I had been so focused on healing, on figuring out who I was without Allison, that I had neglected the idea of opening myself up to new experiences. I didn't want to let the past define me. I didn't want to stay stuck in a place of hurt. It was time to move forward. The conversation shifted, and we talked about everything and nothing. It felt good to be around someone who didn't have any preconceived notions about who I was, who didn't know the old version of me. It was like I had a chance to reinvent myself, to rebuild my life without the shadow of my past hanging over me. By the end of the evening, I realized something important. I didn't have to have everything figured out. I didn't need to rush my healing, my growth, or even the idea of what my future looked like. The most important thing was that I was moving forward. Slowly, but surely, I was rediscovering who I was, and that was enough. The next few weeks brought more of the same, a slow but steady progression. I began taking up activities I had forgotten about, like photography and hiking. I realized how much I had neglected those things during my marriage. But now, with each step forward, I was rediscovering parts of myself that had been lost. I was learning how to be happy again, how to enjoy life on my own terms. I also started to reconnect with other people, people who had been in my life before Allison, people who had known the real me. It was strange at first, trying to navigate relationships without the emotional baggage that had weighed me down for so long. But each conversation, each shared experience, felt like a little victory. Still, there were moments when I found myself thinking about her, wondering where she was, what she was doing. It wasn't jealousy. It was just curiosity. I knew that she was out there, living her life without me, and that was fine. But I couldn't deny that. At times, I felt a pang of sadness. It wasn't because I wanted her back. It was because I had invested so much into our marriage, only for it to end in betrayal. But as the days passed, I realized something important. I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need her to tell me she was sorry. What I needed was to forgive myself, to let go of the guilt I had carried for so long, and to understand that I wasn't to blame for her actions. Her choices were hers alone, and now I was free to make my own. The road to healing wasn't always smooth, and it still isn't. There are days when the weight of the past feels too much to bear. But as long as I keep moving forward, as long as I keep taking one step at a time, I know that I'll get there. I'll find peace. And maybe, just maybe, I'll find love again. On my own terms.